Ребята, всем привет, добро пожаловать на мой канал, меня зовут Ксения, не забывайте на него подписаться, чтобы не пропускать интересные видео, которые выходят здесь каждый день. А сегодня я вас приветствую, по-моему, это третье видео из моей поездки из третьего дня по штату Массачусетс, город Селем, где происходило знаменитое сжигание ведьм в Америке. На самом деле это музей, называется он Witch History Museum, который я не была уверена, что хочу посетить. Я прогуливалась по улице с магазинами, и он там был как-то посередине, и в общем я не смогла удержаться. Не знаю, ожидала ли я какой-то новой информации по сравнению с предыдущим музеем, в котором я была в этот же день, буквально пару часов до этого, но я решила туда все-таки зайти. Давайте посмотрим, что же там есть интересного. Итак, мы с вами пришли в первый музей, вот этот, на который мне поставили типа галочки. Здесь информация, я вставлю также, наверное, фотографии, если вам интересно, чтобы вы все посмотрели. Здесь развешаны фотографии мест, где были захоронены люди. Здесь немножечко такая, знаете, как в церкви атмосфера. Не самая, ну не то, что не самая приятная, а немножко криповато на самом деле.
So this is a depiction of the Samuel Paris households, and this is a scene with Tituba and John Indian. Now, has anyone seen Tituba in film or literature?
Crucible.
Yes. Okay, so in the Crucible, you saw that? Okay. In the Crucible, I think she's like 40, like depicted as older.
I don't remember.
Oh, okay, but I think she's depicted in roughly that age group usually. She's actually probably a teenager, so really she's a child herself. They're brought over. Her and her husband are brought over from Barbados, but they're probably from the north of South America or Central America and Native American. Now Tituba, you know, she's the main caretaker, though she's enslaved for she's been with the family for like 8 years. So just to keep that level, you know, she's really the one raising them because the mother's so ill, and she's been with them, you know, for some time. So she says on record she loves Betty, would never hurt her, just to add a level of heartbreak to what happens in this community. Now, we don't know exactly what happened, but you could imagine it's a long winter. For those of you who can imagine a long New England winter, and 1692 is one of the worst on record, and she's probably trying to keep the girls entertained, you know. There's no cartoons, there's no Wi-Fi. So maybe she's telling them stories about where she's from, which would be very different. Maybe some basic indigenous healing techniques. We're not sure. On record, there's some indication there was some basic fortune telling done where you put an egg in water, you see the shape, you see who you're going to be in love with or who you're going to marry. You know, very innocent things. It was fortune telling done in Europe, in England at the time. Actually, a tour today said they still do it indigenously in Texas. But it's not even clear that Tituba was the one teaching them, but just for the Puritan perspective at this time, any kind of fortune telling is considered witchcraft. And at this time, witchcraft, very different from modern witchcraft, was considered to be a servant of Satan in their perspective. So the girls, you could imagine they were just like having fun, and then they realized they probably were doing something wrong. They saw, on record, it's like they saw something that scared them, like a coffin. So maybe they had a psychosomatic reaction, we're not sure. Betty, there's an idea that maybe she's the 9-year-old, his daughter, had epilepsy, but that doesn't explain everyone else either. So she's also sent away before the trials. Now, it's not until the authority figures come in the shape of the father and the doctor, and they believe in a theological cosmos that involves, you know, invisible witches that torture people. So when they ask the girls questions, they're asking leading questions again and again, like, who's hurting you, who's hurting you? And that is when the girls finally named Tituba and 2 other women from the village, Sarah Osborne and Sarah Good. So those are the first people accused. Now, Tituba does go on to confess, but if you confess at this time, you're less likely to be killed, at least initially. So being enslaved, she was probably a lot wiser to the consequences than other people, so probably why she confessed. Also, in these instances, if you accuse somebody, you're less likely to be accused, almost zero. If you start it, you're safe. So there's a mechanism of just survival, and that's how the hysteria, the mechanism spreads. Saying that person, like falling into a fit and saying that person is torturing me, because they believe the specter is like the spirit that comes out of the witch and can, you know, invisibly hurt people. So very difficult to argue against, you know. Now this is the accusers also said that the witches wasn't that bad. They used canon law. So it's not just the church, it's also the law, it's also the printing press, and it's the power of like.
So it's the media.
Yes, you could say that. But like if, you know, a town is going to kill one person, that's awful, but it's one person. But if you have like, you're able to spread papers, you know, describing these things, and then the courts uphold this, that's kind of what, that's another underlying mechanism. I don't usually talk about it, but you guys were interested, so I just want to add that. Now, they were hung here and in Puritan England because it was considered a felony for Puritans, like a crime to be a witch, but they were burned at stake mostly in continental Europe and Scotland because it was heresy, and they were burned at stake.
On August 19th, 1692, about half a mile away from where you are standing now, George Burroughs, thought to be the devil, was hanged at Gallows Hill with 4 others. New England's leading Puritan minister, Cotton Mather, was there, riding a white horse. When Burroughs was on the ladder to hang, wrote eyewitness Robert Califf, he made a speech for the clearing of his innocence, with such solemn and serious expressions, as were the admiration of all present. His Lord's Prayer drew tears from many, so it seemed to some spectators that it would hinder the execution. But Cotton Mather addressed himself to the people, declaring that the devil has often been transformed into an angel of light, which somewhat appeased the people, and the execution went on.
Witch was left hanging from what we believe was an oak tree on Gallows Hill. The body would then be put into the witch pit, which is essentially a mass shallow grave. Or I read that they also put them in crevices on the hill, and they would steal their clothes and things like that and be very disrespectful. They believed witches were too unholy to be put into the ground. That's why. Now, the families of the victims were told they could not take the bodies. It was illegal, which would have been very significant for them because they believed in a bodily resurrection, which some, you know, religions still do. So legend has it that Rebecca Nurse's family came by night by canoe and got her body, John Proctor's family, and George Jacobs. But ultimately, we don't know where all the bodies are to this day, but wherever they are, may they rest in peace after this crazy time. Speaking of crazy, right behind you, don't be alarmed, but be alarmed, is Cotton Mather. Now, has anyone heard of Cotton Mather? Not a good husband to shut down witches story for his wife, but bad governor. You know, he essentially knew he was going to be killed anyway, and he wanted to pass it on to his son-in-laws, all his land. So he just refused to speak, and so they put him in this torture. I think it was only used once in the colonies. It's like wood and then stones, and you press and you keep wood and stones. Legend has it all he said was more weight. So he's known as being a bit of a wizard and a legend and a spirit that comes back to warn Salem of doom.
Tradition is long current in Salem, wrote Salem's noted author, Nathaniel Hawthorne, that at stated periods, the ghost of Giles Corey, the wizard, appeared on the spot where he had suffered as the precursor of some calamity that was impending over the community, which the apparition came to announce. Old Giles Corey was a pitiful creature, in his 80s, when he was led to the field beside the Salem jail, now the Howard Street burial ground, on September 19th, 1692, he was laid in a pit and crushed to death with stones by Sheriff Corwin and his deputies, cursing Salem and the sheriff as he died. His wife was hanged at Gallows Hill 3 days later. Nobody knows exactly where old Giles was buried, but as Hawthorne says, his ghost returns to the burial grounds at times of great calamities in Salem. He was seen many times, roaming the graveyard in early 1914, before a fire devastated the city, starting at Gallows Hill and destroying all in its path as it swept to the waterfront. Ironically, the flames leapt over the old homes of the historic district like unseen hands. Giles Corey's ghost continues to appear, as Nathaniel Hawthorne predicted, during times of great disaster and as a reminder of Salem's tragic legacy, the Witch's Stay.
Как вы видите, эта экскурсия не была супер насыщенной, видео получилось довольно-таки коротким, хотя некоторые экспонаты были там довольно-таки реалистичные, даже, я бы сказала, немного пугающие. В общем, я не жалею, что я зашла, мне кажется, был интересный опыт, пишите в комментариях, понравилось вам или нет. В общем, видео подходит к концу, всем большое спасибо за просмотр, не забывайте подписаться на канал, чтобы не пропускать интересные видео, которые выходят каждый день. Для меня это очень большая поддержка, для меня это очень важно, я буду очень вам благодарна. Также по ссылочке в описании будет мой инстаграм, где ежедневно какие-то истории, шорты, посты, рилсы на русском и английском языках, прочекайте, вам понравится. Я извиняюсь, если здесь будет не совсем ровный свет. Желаю вам отличного дня, всем еще раз большое спасибо за просмотр и всем пока-пока.